The year was 1942, and the nights over Europe had grown heavy with the hum of war machines. Cities burned quietly after bombings, smoke clinging to the ruins like a second darkness. In the Reich's hidden corners, far from the battlefront, another. War was unfolding, one of flesh, survival, and silent bargains. It began with a simple notice pinned to factory walls or murmured by officials in neat black uniforms. Improved work conditions and food rations available for women willing to volunteer for special service. For a starving seamstress in Dortmund or a clerk's daughter in Breslau, those words could feel like salvation. They rarely mentioned what the special service would mean. Anna Vogel was 20 when the war tightened its grip on her life. Her father had vanished on the Eastern Front. Her mother worked herself to the bone for a loaf of bread. When a camp officer arrived promising lighter duties, better meals, and safety behind the wire, Anna stepped forward with a mixture of fear and hope. She imagined clerical work, perhaps cleaning. Instead, she was put on a truck with other young women, their faces pale and lips cracked from cold. One whispered that they were going to a place called Ravensbrück. Another claimed it was a factory. No one really knew until the gates slammed behind them. The SS had been experimenting with a grim incentive. Heinrich Himmler himself had ordered that Lagerbordell, camp brothels, be established to encourage labor productivity among male prisoners. It was cynical engineering. Promise rewards for work quotas and let the body become another tool of control. By 1945, there would be more than 30 such brothels across occupied Europe. But in 1942, the idea was still new, a secret dark enough to hide behind fences and euphemisms. The women were told they were part of an improvement project. Many only learned the truth when they were inspected by a doctor and handed clean dresses and soap before being locked into narrow rooms with barred windows. Anna remembered the smell before anything else, a sharp blend of disinfectant, damp wood, and fear. Each special building, the Sonderbau, looked harmless from outside, just another barrack. Inside, it was a corridor lined with small chambers, each barely wide enough for a bed and a chair. On the walls hung lists of rules typed on carbon paper. No talking to male prisoners, no personal items, medical checkups twice a week. A Nazi nurse with icy blue eyes conducted exams while an SS man took notes. Cleanliness, they said, is a duty. Behind the clinical language, Anna felt the trap closing. The first night broke something in her. A prisoner from the quarry came in, eyes downcast, hat in hand. He didn't speak German. They barely looked at each other. The act was quick, awkward, stripped of intimacy. Anna felt herself floating somewhere above the wooden boards, where she couldn't feel his rough hands or hear the guard's boots outside. After he left, she sat alone on the bed and stared at the single light bulb until dawn. She was no longer a worker, not quite a prisoner, but something undefined, useful and disposable. Days turned into a pattern of waiting. The women, often a dozen or more in one Sonderbau, moved like ghosts. Some were Germans like Anna, others Poles or Ukrainians pulled from occupied territories. They shared whispered fragments of their past lives, a bakery left behind, a fiancé lost to the front, a child hidden with grandparents. Small alliances, formed in quiet rebellion, braiding each other's hair, sharing contraband scraps of bread. These rituals didn't erase what was happening, but they reminded each other they were still human. Life in the brothel operated on brutal efficiency. Guards logged every visit. Prisoners were given tokens or passes as rewards for hard labor. A night with a woman was just another ration, like cigarettes or soap. Medical officers came weekly to check for disease, sometimes without a word, sometimes with cold remarks about productivity. Pregnancies were feared more than bombs. Abortions were performed in secrecy. Miscarriages left women fevered and weak, with no sympathy from the SS. Anna learned to keep her face blank, to hold her breath when officers entered, to disappear into silence. Yet even in this engineered cruelty, cracks appeared. Once, a Czech prisoner left behind a tiny carved bird, no larger than a thumb, on Anna's pillow. She wept quietly into the night, clutching the small token as if it might anchor her soul. Another time, a young German guard smuggled them an apple, throwing it through the open window before quickly walking away. These moments didn't undo the degradation, but they whispered that the world wasn't entirely stone. Outside the barbed wire, the war shifted. By 1943, whispers of Stalingrad reached even the Sonderbau. Guards grew tenser, radios crackled with bad news. Food rations shrank, patrols became harsher. Some women were transferred as camps were reorganized. Some vanished entirely. The SS began tightening its grip as defeat loomed, punishing infractions more cruelly. Anna watched one friend beaten for speaking to a male prisoner too long. Afterward, the remaining women sat in silence, each nursing her own invisible wounds. The psychological weight grew unbearable. Many of the women had entered the brothels under some form of coercion or desperate survival. Now, as Germany faltered, they realized they would be seen as collaborators, prostitutes for the Reich. The moral grayness was suffocating. Were they victims? Traitors? Survivors? Anna stopped trying to answer. She focused on staying alive, counting days by the sounds of boots and the rare letters smuggled in from home. By 1944, the Allied bombings brought new terror. At night, the ground shook with distant detonations. Flames lit the horizon beyond the camp walls. Each rumble meant the Reich's collapse drew closer, and with it, unknown retribution. Rumors of Soviet armies advancing from the east spread like fever. The women had heard stories: rape, execution, revenge without trial. The Americans, they were told, were only slightly better, wild, angry, ready to punish Germans of any kind. The idea of liberation no longer brought hope. It was another set of teeth in the dark. Anna began to dream of home, though she had none. Her mother's letters stopped coming. The young woman who had once imagined a safer job now clung to the thin mattress each night, wondering if she'd survive the chaos outside the wire. Some of the other women whispered about fleeing west if the chance came, gambling that surrendering to the Americans might be less horrific than falling into Soviet hands. But no one knew. They were caught between collapsing tyranny and an enemy they had been taught to fear. Then, in early 1945, something shifted. Guards who had once strutted now looked anxious. Trucks rumbled out at night, loaded with files and equipment. SS officers whispered in tight groups. One morning, Anna noticed the gate standing strangely ajar, while a lone soldier smoked, his hands trembling. The war machine was unraveling. For the first time, escape felt possible and terrifying. Where would they go? Would the Allies shoot them as collaborators? Would anyone care that they had never chosen this fate? That night, Anna lay awake and listened to the distant boom of artillery. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Americans were advancing. The Sonderbau smelled of damp wood and stale breath, but also of change, unpredictable and sharp as winter air. The women did not speak, yet each felt it. The Reich was dying, and whatever came next would rewrite their lives. But whether that future held mercy or vengeance, no one could say. The winter of 1945 bled slowly into a muddy, restless spring. The sky hung low over Germany, heavy with smoke and rumors. Anna Vogel stood near the camp fence, her thin coat flapping. Against the barbed wire as distant artillery rolled like approaching thunder. The Sonderbau had grown silent. The guards who once barked orders now whispered in anxious clusters. Trucks came at night to haul away crates of documents. By morning, only tire tracks remained in the frost. The Reich, once monolithic and terrifying, was fraying before her eyes, and yet freedom, if it existed, felt like a trap door she might not survive falling through. When the first column of prisoners was marched out, Anna knew it was time. The SS were abandoning posts, shooting dogs, burning papers. One guard muttered to another that the Russians were days away. The word Russen slithered through the barracks like a curse. Every woman had heard the stories: mass rapes, beatings, vengeance without trial. The propaganda had painted the Americans as brutal too, but there were whispers, just whispers, that they gave food, even chocolate, to those who surrendered. To Anna, it sounded like a rumor one might cling to while drowning. Still, the choice felt stark: run west or wait to be devoured by the war's last fury. She packed what she could in a small cloth bundle: a cracked comb, the carved bird, a check prisoner had once left her, and a scrap of bread hard as bone. Others did the same, faces set in grim silence. The Sonderbau sisters, German, Polish, Ukrainian, had shared years of quiet suffering. Now they shared a single hope: to reach the Americans first. Before dawn, they slipped through the half-abandoned gates and onto the frozen road, a ragged procession of women stepping into a world without fences for the first time in years. The roads west were chaos. Streams of refugees clogged every path. Soldiers without rifles, families dragging carts, children wrapped in blankets, old men limping with canes. The air smelled of smoke, manure, and fear. Somewhere far behind, artillery cracked like splitting ice. Anna walked with a small knot of women: Lena, a Polish nurse with sunken cheeks; Greta, who had once laughed easily but now kept her eyes fixed on the ground; and Clara, only 17, her face too young for the lines carved there. They spoke little, saving their strength for the endless trudge. Sometimes they passed villages where white flags hung from windows, desperate signals to approaching armies. Other times they saw houses burned out, their owners gone or worse. Hunger gnawed quickly. The bread turned to crumbs. Water came from ditches or melted snow. One afternoon they passed a farm and dared to beg. An old woman opened the door, took one look at their camp rags, and slammed it shut. "Go back to where you came from," someone shouted from behind the curtains. The women kept moving. Shame clung to them like their threadbare coats. In every pair of eyes they met, Anna saw judgment. Collaborators, whores, traitors. The truth, that survival had demanded impossible compromises, had no language on these roads. At night, they huddled in barns when they could find them. The darkness was filled with coughs, with whispered prayers, with the distant rumble of armies converging. Greta once broke the silence, her voice barely more than breath. "Do you think the Americans will shoot us?" No one answered. Anna clutched the little wooden bird in her pocket, the smooth grain warm against her palm, and wished she knew. Days stretched. The western horizon became an idea they walked toward, one foot after another. Occasionally they passed German soldiers moving the same direction, their uniforms ragged, their eyes hollow. Some offered no glance. Others spat near the women's feet. Once a boy no older than 15 stumbled past, muttering that he was going home. War had eaten its own. When Allied aircraft roared overhead, everyone flung themselves to the roadside ditches. The silver bellies of planes gleamed in the cold light before vanishing, leaving only the echo of engines and the sharp smell of panic. Once, bombs fell miles away, shaking the ground and sending birds shrieking from bare trees. Anna pressed her forehead to the dirt, trembling, wondering if she had fled one death only to find another. By early April, the landscape changed. They passed signs hastily painted over, roads cratered by retreating armies. American leaflets littered the ground, warnings in clumsy German urging surrender. Anna picked one up, its paper damp from dew. "Treat prisoners humanely," it promised. She wanted to believe, but the words felt like another layer of propaganda in a war built on lies. Still, something in her chest stirred, a fragile, almost forgotten hope. One afternoon, they saw their first American tank, squat and green at the edge of a village road. Soldiers lounged nearby, their helmets low over young faces, their rifles slung but not raised. The women froze, breath sharp in the cold. For weeks they had imagined this moment, the end of their flight, the edge of safety, or doom. Lena whispered, "Do we go?" Greta's hands shook. Clara began to cry, soundless sobs that racked her thin frame. Anna stepped forward first. Her heart hammered so loudly she felt it might burst. She raised her empty hands, palms open. The soldiers looked up, wary but not violent. One called out in accented German, "Stop! Who are you?" The words were clipped but not cruel. Anna swallowed and said the only thing she could. "Prisoners." "We ran!" Her voice cracked, and with it, weeks of silent terror seemed to fracture. A young American approached, his boots crunching gravel. He was barely older than she, cheeks ruddy beneath the helmet. His eyes flicked over the group, starved, filthy, trembling. He lowered his rifle. "You!" "Safe now," he said slowly, searching for the words. "No hurt." Another soldier stepped forward, handing out canteens of water. Someone offered a blanket to Clara, who collapsed to her knees and wept openly. Anna stood stunned, the cold metal of fear slowly melting from her spine. The relief was almost painful. After years of degradation and weeks of flight, kindness, simple, functional kindness, felt like a blow. Yet it was not complete salvation. As the soldiers escorted them to a makeshift checkpoint, questions came. "Where from? What camp? Why were you there?" They were photographed, names taken down, bodies examined by medics with brisk efficiency. One officer asked Anna what her work had been. She hesitated, shame burning her throat. "Kitchen," she lied softly. Telling the truth felt dangerous, a confession that could twist the fragile mercy she had just seen. They were given bread, thin soup, and places to rest in an abandoned school. The food made Anna's stomach cramp, but she forced herself to eat. Around her, other refugees, soldiers, civilians, camp survivors, ate in silence, each drowning in private memories. That night, she lay awake on a classroom floor, staring at the ceiling where chalked equations still lingered from another life. She had reached the Americans. She was alive. But the weight of her past pressed harder than ever. Would they find out what she had been? Would survival turn to punishment once more? Morning came with new orders. Trucks would take them to a larger holding camp for processing. The women exchanged looks, fear, relief, uncertainty twined together. Anna touched the wooden bird in her pocket again, its tiny wings smooth under her thumb. She thought of the Sonderbow, the gates swinging open, the long road west. She thought of mercy that felt fragile as glass. As she climbed onto the truck, the sun broke weakly through the clouds, lighting the mud-slick road ahead. Somewhere beyond, the war was ending. But for Anna and the others, another battle was only beginning. To define who they were in the eyes of their captors. To prove that survival did not make them guilty. The rumble of the truck blended with distant artillery, fading now but not gone. Whatever waited at the American camp would decide whether their gamble on humanity had been wise or fatally naive. The convoy jolted through muddy ruts until the fences appeared again, this time crowned with new American sentries in olive drab. The camp was neither fortress nor sanctuary. just a wide clearing of wooden barracks behind orderly coils of wire. Yet, to Anna, who had fled a collapsing Reich, the sight carried both dread and strange relief. The guards at the gate didn't shout or strike. They checked lists, waved trucks forward, and pointed to lines of weary captives. The language barrier hung heavy, but their faces were not twisted with hate. Still, the echo of boots on gravel tightened Anna's chest. She had stepped from one world of cages into another. On the first day, the women were marched to a registration hall that smelled of chalk dust and damp wool. An American officer sat behind a desk, papers stacked like fortifications. Translators moved briskly, asking names, birth dates, camp origins. When Anna's turn came, she kept her eyes down. "Occupation?" the translator asked. The words sliced through her like a blade. "Kitchen," she said again, voice level but brittle. She could feel Lena's gaze flick toward her, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They had all learned to edit their truths. Survival depended on it. Medical inspections followed. Doctors in crisp uniforms examined them with clinical efficiency, checking for lice, venereal disease, malnutrition. For Anna, the touch of a stethoscope on her back was almost unbearable. Not because it hurt, but because it was impersonal, professional, not cruel. After years of violation disguised as order, true neutrality felt disorienting. When a nurse offered her a blanket and a small tin of ointment for cracked skin, she nearly wept, but swallowed the impulse. Daily life in the camp settled into an odd rhythm. Each morning, a bugle's thin cry pulled the refugees from sleep. Rations arrived: dark bread, watery stew, sometimes a thin slice of cheese. The food was simple but steady, more nourishing than anything Anna had known in years. The barracks were drafty, lined with straw mattresses that scratched her legs, but they were not filthy. The Americans sprayed for lice and issued clean shirts when they could. There was no shouting, no sadistic games. Guards paced with rifles, yes, but mostly to watch, not to terrorize. Yet relief bred unease. Anna felt suspended between identities: victim, prisoner, enemy. When the American guards passed cigarettes to men on work details or tossed chocolate to children through the fence, the women watched in silence. Clara, still barely 17, once whispered, "Maybe they don't know what we were." Greta snorted quietly, a sound too bitter to be laughter. The truth, their service in the Nazi brothel, was a secret so heavy it seemed to alter the air. Would kindness curdle if the guards discovered it? Evenings were long and filled with low murmurs in many tongues. Refugees traded stories like contraband, of towns flattened by bombers, of Soviet patrols that left only ashes, of families lost somewhere between borders. Lena spent hours binding wounds and tending fevers. Her training as a nurse gave her purpose and a thin thread of dignity. Greta, once the loudest among them, sat withdrawn, her hands always folded, eyes distant. Clara sometimes scribbled on scraps of paper, half-formed letters to no one. Anna moved quietly between them, grateful for the food and safety, yet haunted by the feeling of being unmoored. She had escaped death, but not judgment. Small acts of unexpected humanity unsettled her the most. One guard, a young man with freckles and a southern drawl she could barely understand, knelt to fix a woman's broken bootlace. Another brought an extra blanket on a freezing night, slipping it wordlessly onto Lena's cot. These were not grand gestures. They were ordinary kindnesses. But to women trained to expect only exploitation, they felt almost dangerous, as if hope itself might be a trap. Time in the camp was measured not by cruelty, but by waiting. Waiting for interviews, for papers to be processed, for rumors of release. Sometimes officials asked questions about the camps they'd fled. Interrogators wanted details, locations, numbers, SS names. Anna answered cautiously, always careful to frame herself as a low-level laborer. Admitting she had been part of the Sonderbau felt like stepping into a new noose. She saw the same fear flicker across Lena's face when asked about special assignments. One afternoon, a truck arrived with Red Cross workers carrying crates of medicine and small parcels. For the first time, Anna saw the American and Swiss emblems side by side, a reminder that some kind of order, some law, still existed beyond barbed wire. The visitors handed out soap and tinned milk. Clara clutched hers like treasure, whispering thanks in broken English. Watching the scene, Anna felt an unexpected stirring. Gratitude, yes, but also confusion. She had spent years reduced to an object, and now strangers were treating her like a person again. Could she believe it? Could she deserve it? Yet guilt seeped through every fragile moment of safety. At night, Anna dreamed of the Sonderbau, of men's faces blurred by survival, of rules posted on thin paper. She woke sweating, certain the Americans would discover everything. In the shadows, Greta sometimes whispered prayers for forgiveness, her voice ragged. "Maybe God turned away," she muttered once. No one replied. The camp itself was not paradise. Overcrowding bred sickness. Latrines overflowed after rain. Some guards grew impatient and barked orders. But the brutality Anna had braced for, the vengeance promised by propaganda, never came. The Americans seemed more interested in logistics than revenge, in turning chaos into manageable lists. It was an unexpected mercy that felt almost alien. One evening, as dusk turned the sky violet, an American officer entered their barrack with a translator. He spoke briskly about processing and relocation. Many of them, he said, were to be reclassified not as enemy combatants, but as displaced persons. The term hung in the air, neither prisoner nor free, but something in between. It promised food, shelter, and eventual passage home or to work programs. It also meant scrutiny, interviews, files, decisions about their worth. When the officer left, a long silence settled. Displaced persons. Anna turned the phrase over in her mind. It sounded almost gentle compared to what she feared, but it was also a reminder. Her story, whatever she told, would shape her fate. She felt Lena's hand brush hers briefly, a small anchor in the uncertainty. Greta stared at the floor, lips pressed tight. Clara asked in a tremor, "Does that mean we're safe?" No one answered. That night, lying awake, Anna listened to the quiet hum of the camp. Distant boots, murmured conversations, the rustle of blankets. She thought of the road west, the carved bird in her pocket, the faces of guards who had vanished. She thought of how mercy could feel both miraculous and terrifying when you believed you deserved nothing. And somewhere beyond these fences, decisions were being made by men with files and stamps that would decide if she could rebuild a life, or if the shadows of the Sonderbau would follow her forever. When the gates finally opened for good, it was without ceremony. One morning, an American officer handed out papers stamped with new identities. Entlassungsschein, release certificates. The war was officially over. Germany had surrendered. Trucks ferried some of the women toward cities reduced to rubble, others toward villages that might still hold a roof or a surviving relative. Anna stepped down from the transport into streets she barely recognized. Her childhood home had been shelled months before. Her mother was gone, lost to bombing or hunger. No one could say. She stood among strangers who regarded returnees with a wary, measuring gaze. Freedom felt colder than captivity. In the American camp, there had been rules, food, a thin fabric of safety. Outside, there was only judgment. Neighbors whispered when they saw her camp-issued papers. Shopkeepers eyed her clothes, her thinness, the foreign stamp on her ration card. Rumors traveled faster than bread. "She was with the Nazis," someone hissed once as Anna passed. The truth, that she had been a prisoner trapped in the Sonderbau, was a truth no one wanted. In post-war Germany, the categories were simple: soldier, victim, collaborator. Women like her fit nowhere. Lena tried to return to nursing, but every hospital asked for work records. Her silence about Ravensbrück created gaps she could not explain. Greta married a wounded veteran after months of isolation. He knew nothing of her past and never asked. Clara, still barely a woman, wandered from one refugee program to another until she vanished into paperwork. Anna stayed in the bombed-out city, working odd jobs, scrubbing floors, mending clothes. She spoke little, her once bright voice hollowed by the fear of exposure. Every knock on the door made her flinch. The new Germany wanted to forget. Trials in Nuremberg named great architects of horror. But the lives of those used and discarded in lesser crimes went unspoken. The camp brothels were an embarrassment, neither fitting the narrative of righteous victims nor heroic resistance. Survivors were shamed twice, first by the regime that exploited them, then by the country that refused to see them. When Anna once confided in a neighbor, the woman's face turned hard. "Better you don't talk about such things," she warned. "People think it meant you agreed." Years passed like this, silence layered upon silence. Yet the memories did not dull. Nights were thick with ghosts, the stench of disinfectant, the paper rules on the wall, the sound of boots approaching her door. Even the unexpected kindness of the American camp became painful to recall. It was a mercy she had been too afraid to trust and too ashamed to cherish. She wondered if the young soldier who had offered her water ever thought of the women he'd met, if he knew that his small act of humanity had been a lifeline she still clung to. In the 1960s, when historians first began to whisper about the Lager Bordel, Anna read an article in secret. It was clinical, distant, a list of dates and statistics. Her story was there, buried under numbers, but without her name, without the ache of the long walk west or the shame of returning home. She folded the paper and burned it. Survival, she had learned, meant disappearing. But history has a way of clawing back to the surface. Decades later, a journalist came to interview former camp inmates. Anna, now gray-haired and frail, almost refused. Then she saw the carved bird still hidden in her drawer, wings worn smooth by her thumb over half a lifetime. She told her story, not with tears, but with the clear, steady voice of someone who had lived in silence too long. When she finished, the room was still. The reporter whispered, "People need to know." Anna nodded. She no longer feared being seen, and yet, when the door closed behind the visitor, she sat alone and trembled. The old fear had not vanished. It had only grown quieter. The past could still wound, but now it had a witness. She thought of Lena, Greta, Clara, the lives scattered and forgotten. She thought of the Americans who had given food instead of bullets, the strangers who had seen her humanity when she herself doubted it existed. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. Outside, the city hummed with the ordinary noise of a rebuilt world. Cars, laughter, footsteps on cobblestone. Anna stepped to the window and watched the light fall across the street. Survival had not absolved her. Freedom had not healed her. But telling the truth felt like reclaiming a piece of herself long stolen. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Steady, unbroken. She closed her eyes and listened, knowing the war had ended long ago, but her story had finally begun to live.